All right, so today we're diving into this whole idea of high-fidelity data and how to use sensitive data, effectively, but also ethically.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, we all know data is like the key ingredient for all this cool stuff, like AI and machine learning and these complex systems. But
Right.
it always feels like there's this tightrope walk between getting the insights you need and then all the privacy concerns and regulations and everything.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. It's definitely a balancing act. You need real world data, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't get around that. You need real world data to build accurate models that actually solve real problems.
Of course.
But then the flip side is using raw data just opens up this whole can of worms. You've got legal risks, reputational risks.
For sure.
And then, people think, oh, well, let's just use synthetic data. But that doesn't actually work because then you end up with biased results and, your solutions at the end of the day are flawed.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, trying to bake a cake, but you're missing like half the ingredients. Or worse, you're like substituting flour for sawdust.
Right, exactly.
You're not going to get the right outcome.
Yeah, you're going to end up with a pretty bad cake.
Exactly. And speaking of bad outcomes, the source material really emphasizes that using incomplete data or synthetic data, it's not just about, the model might be slightly off. It actually can lead you down completely the wrong path.
Oh, absolutely.
So what are some of the consequences of, let's call it bad data, in AI and machine learning? Because I think a lot of people don't really grasp how serious that can be.
Well, the consequences can be pretty far-reaching. It can impact all sorts of things from, healthcare diagnoses to financial predictions.
Wow.
Imagine for a second an AI model that's supposed to be determining loan eligibility, right?
Yeah.
But it was trained on data that's incomplete. So let's say certain demographic groups were like underrepresented in that training data. So what happens? The model might inadvertently perpetuate those existing biases, and then you end up with unfair lending practices, which is a massive ethical concern, obviously.
Yeah, that's a great example. And then on top of all of that, we've got this whole regulatory landscape to deal with, right?
Yeah. Oh, tell me about it.
GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA, I mean, those are just like the tip of the iceberg.
The tip of the iceberg.
It seems like every time you turn around, there's a new regulation to worry about.
Absolutely. And the thing is, these regulations aren't just some kind of bureaucratic hurdles. They're actually there for a reason.
Okay.
They're in place to protect individuals, to foster trust.
Yeah.
The source material actually gets into some of the philosophical side of data privacy, saying, it's not just about, we have to comply with the law. It's about respecting human dignity and autonomy in this digital age, which I thought was really interesting.
That is interesting. So it's more than just a checkbox.
It's a much bigger concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so privacy matters. I think we've established that.
It does.
But it always feels like this big no in the room. Like every time you try to do something innovative, it's like,
yeah.
Oh, but wait, what about privacy?
Right.
And the source material actually highlights some common pain points that I think will probably resonate with a lot of our listeners. Things like manual data masking. I talk about tedious and prone to errors. And then there's traditional anonymization, which sounds good in theory, but it can actually destroy those valuable patterns, making the data almost useless.
Yeah, and then you've got those overly strict policies that just slow everything down. Innovation, decision-making, everything just grinds to a halt.
Right. So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Pretty much, yeah.
And then even when you have these frameworks in place, they don't always work as intended, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Even with the best intentions, you're still going to run into problems.
Yeah.
Like take the HHS Safe Harbor example. It was supposed to be this guide for de-identification, but in practice, it's inflexible.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it leads to data quality issues. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you're trying to navigate, I don't know, a really complicated city with an outdated map. You're eventually going to get there, but it's going to be a really frustrating and inefficient journey.
I like that analogy. Yeah, it's like you're using MapQuest in 2023.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get out of the theoretical and let's talk about a real world example, something concrete.
Okay, I like it.
Imagine you're a pharmaceutical company and you're trying to analyze drug adherence rates across a bunch of different pharmacies.
Okay. Yeah.
You want to know Okay, how many patients are actually taking their medication as prescribed? What are the dosage patterns looking like? And you want to break it down by different demographics, by zip code, things like that.
Yeah, very granular data.
Exactly. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
Well, on the surface, yeah.
Yeah.
But as soon as you start digging in, you run into these privacy concerns.
Of course, right.
Because the company doesn't actually need to know, oh, this specific patient is taking this medication. They're looking for trends, aggregate data.
Right.
But the problem is, pharmacy records, those are packed with PII. You can't just go sharing that raw data. It's a legal and ethical nightmare.
Yeah. So you're kind of stuck, right?
Yeah, you're between a rock and a hard place.
If you try to do the traditional anonymization thing, you strip away too much detail, and then the data is basically useless for that granular analysis that you need.
Exactly.
And you can't just redact certain parts of the data, because then you might create these false linkages and actually end up distorting your findings.
Right. It's a tricky situation.
So what's the solution then? What do you do?
Well, this is where this whole high-fidelity data thing comes into play.
Okay, tell me more.
The source material presents this as like a total game changer.
Really?
It's not just about redacting information or masking it. It's about transforming the data in a way that it still retains its value for analysis.
Okay.
But at the same time, you're safeguarding privacy.
So it's like having your cake and eating it too.
Exactly. You get to analyze those real-world patterns without putting anyone's privacy at risk.
I mean, it sounds amazing, but how does it actually work? Like, what makes this different from all those traditional anonymization techniques that we've been talking about?
Okay, well, let's unpack that after a quick break.
All right, sounds good. We'll be right back. Okay, so we're back, and we left off on this idea of high-fidelity data and how it can, solve this privacy dilemma. But yeah, I'm still kind of struggling with, how does it actually work? Is it some kind of, magical data scrambling technique?
Well, it's not magic, but it's definitely pretty clever. The best way I can explain it, I think, is imagine you're creating a map of a city, but it's a really detailed map, right?
Okay.
But instead of using the actual street names and addresses, you replace them with, unique codes. So you can still navigate the city, you can understand the layout, you can even analyze traffic patterns, but you can't actually pinpoint individual houses or who lives there.
I see. So it's like you're preserving the big picture or the relationships between things.
Exactly. That's the essence of high-fidelity data. You're preserving those statistical relationships within the data, but without compromising individual privacy.
So you're saying it really is like having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah.
You get to analyze those real-world patterns without, worrying about violating anyone's privacy.
Pretty much, yeah.
And the source material mentions these 4 key pillars of the high-fidelity data specification.
Right.
Visual integrity, population integrity, statistical integrity, and then ownership integrity.
Yeah, those are the 4 key components.
Let's break those down a little bit, starting with visual integrity. What does that actually mean in practice?
So visual integrity basically means the transformed data, it still looks and feels real.
Okay.
Which is really important for usability. Because if you think about our drug adherence example, with visual integrity, the transformed data would still resemble actual prescription records. So the researchers, they can easily do their analysis.
Right.
They don't have to learn some whole new data format. It's still familiar.
Gotcha. So it's user-friendly, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, what about population integrity? What's that all about?
So population integrity, that ensures that the data sets accurately reflect the real-world population, which is super important for avoiding bias in AI and machine learning models.
Oh, right, because if your data is skewed, then your results are going to be skewed.
Exactly. So if you're analyzing drug adherence across different age groups, you need to make sure that the transformed data actually represents the real age distribution in the population.
Makes sense. Okay, I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
And statistical integrity. I mean, that one sounds kind of self-explanatory, right?
Yeah, it is, but it's also the most crucial part.
Yeah.
Statistical integrity is all about preserving those correlations and distributions that make AI and ML models accurate.
Yeah.
So in our drug adherence example, statistical integrity would ensure that the transformed data still has those relationships between dosage patterns, patient demographics, and other relevant factors.
So that the researchers can actually draw meaningful conclusions, right?
Exactly. You're not just anonymizing the data. You're transforming it in a way that actually keeps that analytical power.
I'm with you. Okay, now the last one, Ownership integrity, that one sounds a bit more abstract to me.
Yeah, ownership integrity, that's all about ensuring data trust and control over access.
Okay.
So basically, who can see the data, who has the authority to grant or deny access. It's kind of like having a really secure vault for your data.
Oh, okay. I like that analogy. So it's not just about protecting the data itself, but also controlling who gets to see it.
Exactly.
This sounds like it could be a game changer for industries like healthcare and finance, where data security and privacy are like non-negotiable.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine a world where hospitals, insurance companies, researchers, they can all collaborate on this sensitive patient data, but without compromising anyone's privacy. That's the kind of secure data ecosystem that high-fidelity data can create.
That's a really compelling vision. But okay, let's go back to our pharmaceutical company. They're still struggling with that drug adherence problem. How does high-fidelity data actually solve their dilemma?
So with high-fidelity data, they can analyze those adherence trends, but they never actually see a single patient's name or personal details.
Wow.
The pharmacies, they contribute their data securely, knowing that they're not running afoul of any privacy regulations. And most importantly, the patients, they can have peace of mind knowing that their information is being handled responsibly and ethically.
So it's like a win-win-win for everyone involved.
Exactly.
Now, the source material also mentions this company, High-Fidelity, and their tool, PyDiver. What's their role in all of this?
So High-Fidelity, they're the ones who are really in the forefront of this whole new approach.
Okay.
They developed the High-Fidelity Data Specification, and they also created PyDiver, which is a tool that actually automates this whole high-fidelity transformation process.
So PyDiver is like the magic wand that makes all this possible.
I wouldn't say magic wand, but it definitely simplifies what would otherwise be a very complex process. PyDiver basically lets organizations apply high-fidelity transformation to their data without having to build these complex systems from scratch.
That sounds incredibly useful, especially for organizations that might not have the technical expertise in-house to implement something like this.
Exactly. It makes it much more accessible.
But I'm also curious about the potential challenges. I mean, is there a risk that this transformed data could be, reverse engineered somehow?
That's a really good question. And it's definitely something that High-Fidelity has thought about very carefully.
Okay.
PyDiver uses some very robust cryptographic techniques, and it goes through rigorous testing to make sure that the privacy protections are, as strong as they can be.
So they're trying to make re-identification practically impossible.
Exactly. That's the goal.
Okay. That's reassuring to hear. But I'm also wondering about how this might impact, data analysis techniques. Will researchers need to, learn a whole new set of tools or adapt their methods to work with high-fidelity data?
That's another great question. While some adjustments might be needed, a lot of those existing analytical techniques should still work just fine.
Okay.
Because remember, high-fidelity data, it preserves those statistical properties of the original data.
Right.
And in fact, it might even lead to more accurate results because you're reducing the bias that's introduced by traditional anonymization.
So it's not just about protecting privacy, it's also potentially improving the quality of the analysis.
Exactly. It's kind of a win-win situation.
That's amazing.
Okay.
This is still a relatively new approach, so I'm wondering, what do you see as the biggest hurdles to wider adoption?
I think one of the biggest challenges is simply awareness. A lot of organizations are still kind of stuck in that old anonymization mindset. They don't realize there's a better way. And then there's also the perceived complexity. I think some organizations might be intimidated by the technical aspects of high-fidelity transformation.
Even with tools like PyDiver available, it still seems daunting.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really a matter of education and showing people the value proposition.
Yeah, making the case for why this is a good investment.
Exactly. We need to show organizations that high-fidelity data, it's not just about checking a box, it's actually a strategic advantage.
Right, it's about building trust, differentiating yourself.
Exactly. It lets you unlock the value of your data, but in a way that also builds trust with your customers, your stakeholders, everyone.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the challenges, the solutions, the potential impact. But let's bring it back to our listener for a minute.
Yeah, good idea.
We've thrown a lot of information at them. So what does all this mean for you, the person listening? How could this technology actually transform your industry or your area of interest?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
It is.
We've talked about healthcare, pharmaceuticals, but think about all the other areas where sensitive data is crucial. Finance, education, government services. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. Imagine researchers studying the effectiveness of different teaching methods. using anonymized student data, or urban planners optimizing traffic flow based on anonymized location data.
That's really cool.
The potential is huge.
And it's not just about the benefits for organizations, right? Think about the impact on individuals. Imagine a world where you can contribute your data to research or innovation without having to worry about it being misused or, ending up in the wrong hands.
Absolutely. That's the ultimate goal here, right? To create a data ecosystem where privacy and utility, they're not at odds anymore. They actually work together to drive progress and benefit society as a whole.
That's a really powerful vision. And it sounds like we're at this turning point, We can either keep struggling with the limitations of those traditional anonymization techniques, or we can embrace these new innovations that let us balance privacy and data utility much more effectively.
I think you're right. It's an exciting time to be working in this field.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to distill those key takeaways for our listener. What are the most important things to remember about high-fidelity data? Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but let's try to boil it down to those key takeaways for our listeners. What are the most important things to remember about this whole high-fidelity data approach?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that high-fidelity data, it's not just about compliance. It's really about changing how we think about privacy.
So it's more than just checking boxes.
Way more. It's about seeing privacy as a strategic advantage, not a roadblock.
That's a really good point. It's not just about protecting data. It's about making privacy a core value.
Exactly. And when you do that, it builds trust and opens up new possibilities.
Makes sense. In a world with all these data breaches and privacy concerns, companies that prioritize privacy, they're going to stand out.
Absolutely. Customers are going to trust them more. Top talent is going to want to work for them. And it could even lead to new business opportunities.
So it's good for business and it's the right thing to do. But how do we actually make that shift? How do we go from this idea of privacy as a strategic advantage to actually implementing it?
That's where these new technologies come in, things like high-fidelity data transformation. They give you the tools to make privacy a core part of how you handle data.
So instead of saying we can't do that because of privacy, it becomes we can do that and protect privacy, which makes us even better.
Exactly. And that sends a strong message. It shows that you're committed to privacy, not just talking about it.
Well, we've talked about the challenges, the solutions, the impact. It seems like we're at a real turning point. We can keep doing things the old way with all those limitations, or we can embrace these new innovations.
I agree. It's an exciting time. We're seeing these real-world solutions popping up, like the High-Fidelity Data Specification and tools like PyDiver, and they have the potential to change everything.
So what's the one thing we want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
The future of data isn't about choosing between usability and privacy. It's about having both. And high-fidelity data transformation is showing us how to get there.
It's been a fascinating conversation. Hopefully everyone listening now has a better understanding of how high-fidelity data can help us unlock those insights from sensitive data without compromising individual rights. Who knows, maybe you'll be the one to come up with the next big breakthrough. That's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening.